Some stories don't begin with betrayal. They begin with loyalty, with sacrifice, with the belief that love, especially family love, is supposed to be unconditional. I was the oldest daughter, the responsible one, the quiet one. I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed kind enough, and asked for little, I'd always have a place in my family. But families aren't built on logic. They're built on memory, on choice, on repetition. And one day, my mother made a choice that shattered everything. "You're not part of this family anymore," she said. That sentence didn't just end a conversation, it ended a legacy. But what they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was what I did next. Because sometimes being cast out isn't a curse, it's an awakening. This is the story of how I was erased from the family album and became the one name none of them could forget. "You're not part of this family anymore," my mom said, cold, flat, and without blinking. It was the night before Chloe's wedding. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even emotional. She just stood there in the kitchen with her arms crossed, as if she had rehearsed that line for years. She didn't ask me how I was holding up. She didn't mention Daniel, my husband, who had just died 2 weeks earlier. There wasn't a single word of condolence from her, not even a look of discomfort. I remember gripping the edge of the counter not because I was going to fall, but because I needed to hold on to something that reminded me I still existed. I had come home to grieve, not to be exiled. My name is Emily Rivera. I'm 32 years old, a public school teacher. And that night I realized I was truly alone in this world, even with both my parents alive and well. Growing up, I was the firstborn, the one who knew how to fold laundry before she could spell the word, the one who watched Chloe while mom went to work double shifts at the diner, the one who learned how to stretch $1 into dinner for 3. I never resented it. Not then. I thought that's just what big sisters do. But when Chloe turned 12 and started ballet, mom suddenly had time to curl her hair, time to attend recitals, time to take pictures and post them online. Dad started calling her our little star. When I got into college on scholarship, they barely acknowledged it. "You're supposed to be smart," Mom said, while washing dishes. That's not a surprise. The night Daniel proposed to me, Chloe got accepted into an Ivy League school. Guess whose celebration dinner we skipped mine for still? I didn't mind not until the accident. Daniel died helping fix a stranger's car in the rain. A passing truck didn't see him kneeling on the side of the road. I called my parents from the hospital crying. Dad said, "Oh no, that's awful. But you know Chloe's wedding is coming, we're swamped." Mom said nothing, not a word. They didn't show up to the funeral, they didn't send flowers, no one from their side did. But I still came home hoping grief would break whatever walls had been built over the years. Instead, I was handed a sentence final and cruel. "You're not part of this family anymore." I walked upstairs, past the hallway filled with Chloe's framed photos, not a single one of me. I packed my overnight bag, and I told myself as I zipped it shut that this was the last time I'd ever beg to belong. The next morning, I got a notification on my phone, Chloe's wedding post, finally reunited. The whole family together for our big day. There was a picture of my parents, Chloe, her husband, even distant cousins. Everyone smiling. I didn't comment. I didn't message. I just saved the photo into a folder called Receipts. Because what they didn't know was the last person who truly believed in me was my grandfather. And before he died, he left me something, not just memories, but power. And I was about to use it. Growing up in a 2-bedroom house in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I learned early that love in my family wasn't unconditional. It was earned, and even then inconsistently rewarded. I was born when my parents were still struggling to stay afloat. Dad working as a mail carrier, Mom juggling part-time jobs while taking community college classes she never finished. For a while, it felt like we were a team. I'd hear them argue over bills, whisper plans after bedtime about how things would get better. But by the time Chloe came along 6 years after me, it felt like I'd become invisible. I remember holding Chloe for the first time when I was 6.5. Mom handed her to me with tears in her eyes and whispered, She's our miracle. She never called me that, but I smiled anyway. I held Chloe like she was made of glass, like she was already more precious than anything I'd ever touched. As Chloe grew up, the word miracle became prophecy. She was delicate where I was strong. She was quiet where I was practical. She was adored where I was useful. When I turned 10, I was already packing lunches, helping with math homework, mine and hers, and cleaning the bathroom every Saturday morning before my parents woke up. Dad would say Emily's our little soldier, ruffling my hair without looking up from his paper. But when Chloe walked into the room with mismatched socks, the world paused. "Oh, look at this goofball," Mom would laugh, scooping her up for kisses. It wasn't just at home. At school functions, my parents sat through every one of Chloe's ballet recitals, but never came to my science fairs. When I won the 8th grade essay contest, I came home holding the ribbon. Mom glanced at it, said, "That's nice," and went back to frosting Chloe's cupcakes for her sleepover. Still, I never rebelled. I didn't have the energy. I just studied harder, worked part-time jobs from the time I was 15, and earned a full ride to Temple University. I never blamed Chloe. How could I? She never asked to be the favorite. She was sweet, always saying sorry for taking the last cookie or forgetting my birthday. But she never saw the system she benefited from. When I graduated college at 21, I didn't even get a family dinner. Dad was on a fishing trip. Mom had a migraine. Chloe had just started her internship at a fashion magazine in New York, and everyone was so proud of her. I moved out with nothing but my degree and $200 in a savings account. I rented a basement apartment in Philadelphia, slept on an air mattress, and started teaching 3rd grade. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. 3 years later, I met Daniel. He was different from anyone I'd ever known, steady, kind, and grounded in ways that made me feel safe for the first time. We met volunteering at a reading program for underprivileged kids. He was fluent in Spanish, worked in logistics, and made every child feel seen. He treated me like I was the center of the room even when I felt invisible. When I brought him home to meet my parents, the silence was immediate. Mom's smile was tight. Dad didn't say much until he pulled me aside later and said, "You really want your kids to have a different last name?" I didn't reply. I just nodded. That night, I cried in the car. Daniel held my hand the whole way back to Philly, didn't say a word, just squeezed gently when I wiped my face with my sleeve. We got married in a small ceremony at a park with friends, coworkers, and a few distant cousins. My parents declined. Too short notice, they said. Chloe was backpacking through Europe and sent a congrats text with a balloon emoji. For a while, I stopped hoping. Daniel became my home. He filled the quiet with music, Sunday breakfasts, and small notes in my lunchbox that said things like, "You are enough and breathe. You're doing great." And for a brief, beautiful chapter, I believed it. But that chapter would be shorter than I expected. And my family, they never once turned the page. The signs were always there, small, almost dismissible moments that when viewed individually seemed harmless. But over time they layered like sediment, creating a wall I couldn't scale. It started with the phone calls. After our wedding, I tried to keep the connection. I'd call Mom every Sunday just like I used to. At first she'd answer with mild enthusiasm. "Oh, hi, sweetie." But the conversations were brief. She never asked about my job. Never asked how Daniel was adjusting to the new company. She did, however, update me weekly on Chloe. "Chloe just had lunch with her editor today. Chloe's moving to a bigger apartment. Can you believe that view?" One time she even said, "You should talk to Chloe. She could teach you a thing or two about style." I remember staring at the phone in silence, unsure how to respond. I was wearing the cardigan Daniel gave me for our anniversary. I liked it. It was soft, functional me. Dad was more indirect. He didn't call at all. When we did speak, usually during holidays, he kept things surface level. Weather, work, gas prices. And then like clockwork, he'd ask, "You and Daniel doing okay financially?" Never "Are you happy?" Always "Are you managing?" It didn't matter how many times I told him we were fine, that I was up for a promotion, that Daniel's firm was expanding. He'd still end with, "You know, if you ever need help, Chloe's got a good head for business." It was Chloe's world. We just lived on its edge. The holidays were the hardest. Our first Christmas as newlyweds. Daniel and I invited my parents to dinner. I planned the menu a week in advance, baked salmon, roasted vegetables, his grandmother's cornbread recipe. I cleaned every inch of our one-bedroom apartment until the air smelled like lemon and hope. They didn't come. An hour before dinner, Mom texted feeling tired. Maybe next week. But I saw their photos online the next day smiling at Chloe's rooftop party in Manhattan. They wore the same sweaters I'd bought them the Christmas before. I sat on the couch, Daniel beside me, our plates still full. He didn't say anything. He just picked up a fork and ate, chewing slowly, like he didn't want me to notice his heart breaking too. That night, I deleted Instagram. I didn't need another window to a world I wasn't invited to. Still, I tried. When Chloe got promoted to senior coordinator, I sent her flowers with a handwritten card. When I published an article in an education journal, I emailed the link to my parents. Mom replied, "Nice." Chloe just got featured in Vogue. Dad never responded. Eventually, I stopped sending. There's only so many times you can extend a hand before you learn to keep it in your pocket. Then came the fundraiser. Our school was holding a literacy drive, and I was helping organize it. We needed sponsors, people to donate books or money. Daniel suggested reaching out to family. So I did. I called Mom. "Hi, I was wondering if you and Dad might be interested in supporting a reading drive for underprivileged kids." She cut me off. "We've already committed to Chloe's charity. You know she's doing great things for fashion students." I thanked her and hung up. Later, Daniel found me in the kitchen, still holding the phone. He didn't ask what happened. He just hugged me quietly. And I thought, this man, this gentle, constant man, he's the family I choose. Still, it hurt. There's a particular kind of ache that comes not from what's said, but what isn't. When Daniel and I started trying for a baby, I didn't tell anyone. Not because I didn't want to share, but because I knew they wouldn't ask. And when the first round of treatments failed, I told only Daniel. He held me through the night, whispering, "You're not broken." But a few weeks later, during a family call, Mom casually mentioned Chloe says she doesn't want kids. Smart choice, too much baggage. I felt something inside me crack. I said nothing, just stared at the screen, watching their faces laugh at a joke I didn't hear. Eventually, I stopped attending the calls. Eventually, I stopped waiting for invitations. Eventually, I realized my family didn't forget me. They remembered. They just chose not to see me. And that realization, quiet and cruel, was the beginning of the end. The day Daniel died, the sky was too blue. It should have been storming. It should have matched the noise in my chest. He had volunteered to lead a community outreach trip, mentoring teens in a rough part of the city. He said he believed in second chances, even for those the world had already written off. That was Daniel. Gentle, patient, too hopeful for his own safety. I was grading papers when I got the call. A student had pulled a stolen car onto the curb, reckless and high. Daniel was trying to get the others out of the way. He succeeded. He was the only one hit. I remember staring at my coffee mug as the officer spoke. The chipped rim. The word joy painted in green cursive. What a cruel joke. I didn't cry right away. Grief came in strange waves. First it was silence, absolute dead silence inside my body. Then the shattering, the kind that starts deep in your stomach and ripples through your bones. I called Mom that night. She picked up after the third ring. "Emily, what's going on? It's late. Daniel's dead." There was a pause, a long one. Then, "Oh, Emily, that's terrible." She didn't ask how. She didn't ask if I was alone. She didn't ask if I needed anything, just silence. Then, well, Chloe's wedding is only 2 weeks away. Timing couldn't be worse. I almost dropped the phone. I stood in the kitchen barefoot, holding the phone with shaking fingers. The same kitchen Daniel and I had danced in, slow and laughing, the night we passed the fertility test. I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. I don't remember much about the next day or the one after that. I know I made arrangements. I picked the casket, the music. I chose sunflowers because Daniel once said they reminded him of my smile. No one from my family came, not Mom, not Dad, not Chloe, not even a card. A neighbor brought cookies. A student's mother hugged me so tightly I felt my spine realign. But my parents. They were in Napa celebrating Chloe's bachelorette weekend. I found their photos online, matching white outfits, champagne glasses. Hashtag Shakrajpak Chloe found the one. I stared at the screen hollowed out. Daniel's parents flew in from Houston. His dad placed a trembling hand on my shoulder and said, "You gave our son a soft place to land." I wept for hours after that. A week after the funeral, I got a text from Dad. "We hope you're doing okay. Let us know when you're feeling more stable." Chloe's final fittings are this weekend. I didn't respond. What could I say that I woke up in the middle of the night expecting to feel Daniel's breath against my neck? That I still set 2 places for breakfast by mistake. That I hadn't left the house in 5 days. I printed the text and taped it to the fridge. A reminder, not of cruelty but of clarity. They'd made their choice. I was no longer one of them. I didn't try to call again. I didn't send updates. Didn't ask why they didn't come. Didn't explain why I left Daniel's shoes by the door, like he might come home one day and need them. Grief is a language most people are afraid to speak. But I learned to be fluent. I talked to Daniel in the mornings, told him about the birds nesting outside the window. I lit candles in the evening, sat on the porch with his favorite records. I created rituals where love still had a place to live. And slowly the pain began to make space for something else. Not peace, not yet, but awareness. I knew who I was to my parents now. An inconvenience, a reminder of something messy, someone who didn't fit into the perfect family photo, and yet part of me still held on to hope. That maybe, just maybe, they'd show up one day, not with flowers, not with apologies, but with recognition. That never came, not even when the obituary was printed. It ran in the local paper, simple, understated. I signed my name at the bottom, Emily Reyes, loving wife. I waited for a call, a card, a text, nothing. Grief didn't destroy me, but their silence did. 2 weeks after the funeral, I did something foolish. I convinced myself that maybe my parents had just needed time. Maybe grief had frozen them the same way it froze me. Maybe I wasn't the only one who didn't know how to speak through the silence. So I picked up the phone. Again. Mom answered on the second ring. Her voice was bright, rehearsed, like she had been smiling before picking up. "Emily." "Oh, hi." I paused. "I thought I'd come by this weekend," I said, steadying my voice. "Drop off some of Daniel's books. Maybe stay for dinner." There was a beat of silence. Then came the words I didn't see coming. "I think it's better you don't, sweetheart. Chloe's really trying to stay in a positive mindset right now." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "I'm not asking to talk about Daniel," I said. "I'm your daughter. I lost my husband. I just want to be Emily." She cut in, her tone sharper now. "We don't want any drama. This is Chloe's moment. Please don't make it about you. Make it about me." I had been trying so hard not to make anything about me. I swallowed hard. "Dad's okay with this?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. "Then your father agrees it's for the best." And just like that, it was done. No room for debate, no space for emotion. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. I sat on the floor of my living room, where Daniel's books were still stacked by the fireplace, waiting to be packed. I stared at them for a long time. At the sticky notes he used to mark his favorite quotes. At the coffee stains, the dog-eared corners, the physical remnants of a life cut short. They didn't even want to see them. Didn't want a trace of him. Didn't want a trace of me. 3 days later, I received a text from Mom. It read, "Chloe doesn't feel comfortable with you attending the wedding. It's been a hard year for everyone. We hope you understand. No invitation, no explanation, no apology. Just a verdict. I was officially uninvited. Chloe didn't call, not once. Not even after Daniel died. Not even after the text." I reread it a dozen times, trying to decode the cruelty beneath the casual phrasing. Chloe doesn't feel comfortable. Since when did comfort outrank family? I looked around my apartment, small and quiet, filled with memories that now felt more like ghosts than gifts. The silence pressed down on me, heavy, suffocating. They weren't just rejecting my grief. They were rejecting me. It was one thing to forget a birthday, to miss a call, to disagree, but this was exile. I opened my old photo albums that night. Not the digital ones, but the heavy leather-bound book I kept under my bed. It had pictures from when Chloe and I were kids before everything changed. Before favoritism carved lines into our family that no one acknowledged but me. There we were in matching pajamas, making cookies with Grandma. Me holding Chloe's hand on her first day of kindergarten. Chloe asleep on my shoulder during road trips. Somewhere along the line, those moments stopped meaning anything to them. But they still meant something to me. That's when I realized, you can't beg people to remember your love. You can only remember that it existed, and that it was real. The night of Chloe's wedding, I stayed home. I didn't check social media. Didn't answer calls. Didn't cry. I poured a glass of wine, put on one of Daniel's jazz records, and wrote in my journal, "They say grief separates the living from the dead, but sometimes the truly living are the ones left behind, still breathing, still aching, still waiting for a place to belong." I didn't belong to them anymore, but I wasn't going to disappear. I didn't receive an invitation, no envelope in the mail, no email, not even a text message. For weeks I told myself maybe it was just delayed. Maybe they were waiting for the right moment. Maybe Chloe was overwhelmed with wedding planning and had just forgotten. Maybe Mom and Dad would call. Maybe they'd say something kind, something human. But none of that happened. What did happen was silence, dense and deliberate. The kind of silence that doesn't happen by accident, but by decision. The kind that says, we've already chosen. And it's not you. Then came the photos. Chloe had posted them early 2 days before the wedding. Rehearsal dinner snapshots. Beautiful venue, soft lights, tables with place cards, my name not among them. One picture stopped my breath, our mother laughing her arms around Chloe, both in white dresses. Matching smiles, matching contempt. I felt something in my chest crack, but not break. No breaking implies sound. This was quieter, a hollowing. Rachel, a friend from college who knew us both, called me the next day. She started cautiously. "Are you going to Chloe's wedding?" I stared at the floor. "No," I said. She hesitated. "You can't make it. I wasn't invited." The silence on the other end was thunderous. "Oh my God," she whispered. "But you're her sister." Apparently not the kind she wants. Rachel didn't know what to say. Nobody did. Not even me. I tried to keep my mind off it. I tried to work, to sleep, to eat. But the wedding day came, and it came loudly. Social media exploded. Everyone was tagged: Mom, Dad, Chloe, her husband-to-be. Everyone but me. Their smiles perfect. Their captions sickening. One of the happiest days of our lives. So lucky to be surrounded by love and family. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for everything. Everything. I sat in my one-bedroom apartment, wrapped in a blanket Daniel had given me on our 3rd anniversary, and felt like I had ceased to exist. I didn't cry. Not at first. Instead, I scrolled through comments from people who had no idea I existed. Such a beautiful family, you can see how close they are. Your parents must be so proud of both daughters. Both. There was only one in those pictures. One daughter, one narrative. I had been erased. That's what hurt the most, not the lack of an invitation, not the public slight, but the rewrite, the quiet revision of reality. As if I had never been. I closed the app, tossed my phone across the couch, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and tried to steady my hands. They were shaking. And then, I did cry, not for Chloe, not even for my parents, but for Daniel. For the way he would have held me if he were here. For the way he used to say, "Family doesn't get to unwrite you. You're ink." I remembered something then, something I'd forgotten in my grief. A jacket. One of Daniel's old jackets. After the funeral, I had packed away most of his things. But that one jacket, brown corduroy, elbows worn, collar soft. I'd kept it in the hall closet. I suddenly had the urge to touch it, to hold it. I opened the closet and reached into the pocket. That's when I felt it. An envelope, sealed. My name written on the front in Daniel's handwriting. I froze. My breath caught as I carefully opened it. Inside was a note and a small flash drive. The note said, "I don't know what they'll do when I'm gone. But I do know this: you deserve the truth. Your grandfather knew it. He left this for you. Don't wait too long." I stared at the flash drive like it was a live wire, my heart beat in my throat. What truth? I turned on my laptop, inserted the drive. One file, audio, titled, "For Emily, from Grandpa." My hand hovered over the mouse. I clicked. And then his voice, clear, unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, my girl, then I fear what I hoped wouldn't happen has. If they've turned their backs on you, it's not your fault. It never was. I've made arrangements. You'll understand soon." I covered my mouth. He knew. He saw this coming. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt seen. And I wasn't going to let them rewrite me out of the story. Not again. Not ever. I listened to that voice message 3 times. Each time, Grandpa's words dug deeper, not like knives, but like seeds. They didn't cut me. They rooted something in me. Something old but forgotten. Something mine. His voice had always had a weight to it, not heavy like judgment, but dense like meaning. Like it carried more than just words. "I've made arrangements," he'd said. I sat there frozen for minutes, the cursor blinking on the screen like a heartbeat. Arrangements. What kind? What did he know? And how Daniel must have spoken to him. That much was clear, but Daniel had never told me. He had tucked this into the jacket quietly, like a man slipping a note into a bottle and setting it afloat, hoping it would reach me at the right moment. Maybe he knew I'd need it more later than now. I opened my notebook, the one I hadn't touched since Daniel passed. I flipped to the back, scribbled 2 words: his will, his truth. Then I circled them. My grandfather had passed away 3 years earlier, the same year Chloe graduated from college. It had been a quiet funeral. Not many showed up. I remembered standing alone by his grave after everyone left, whispering thank you through tears. He had raised my mother, but he was always more of a father to me than anyone else. He saw me, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person. And he never once treated Daniel as anything less than family. He'd called him Mijo, my boy. I remembered one night, maybe a year before Grandpa died, Daniel and I had driven him home from a hospital appointment. Grandpa was quiet in the back seat until we pulled up to his driveway. Then he said, "Emily, if things ever get hard, really hard, don't go looking for revenge. Look for truth. It'll protect you longer." At the time, I thought it was just an old man's vague advice. Now I realized it was something more. I reached out to the lawyer who'd handled his affairs, a Mr. Conway. I had only met him once, but I remembered his name from the funeral program. I searched it up, found his number, and called. It rang twice. Conway and Lyman, a young assistant, answered. "Hi, I hesitated. My name is Emily Rivera. I was the granddaughter of Edwin Hamilton. He passed away 3 years ago. I think your firm handled his will." A pause. "One moment, please." Click. Hold music. 30 seconds passed. Then a deeper voice came on the line. "Miss Rivera," the man said, calm and precise. "I was wondering if you might call one day. I'm glad you did. That alone told me everything." He didn't ask who I was. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. He asked me to come in the next day. I barely slept that night. When I arrived at the firm, it smelled like old paper and lemon oil. The kind of place where nothing is ever misplaced. Mr. Conway was in his 60s, impeccably dressed. The kind of man who looked like he ate policy for breakfast. He motioned for me to sit, opened a locked drawer, and took out a thin folder. "This," he said, "is the alternate codicil your grandfather prepared shortly before his passing." "Alternate?" I asked. He nodded. There were two versions of his will, one for public release and one contingent. It was to be activated under very specific circumstances. He slid the folder across to me. I opened it. At the top, addendum to the last will and testament of Edwin Hamilton. And then I read the line that nearly made me drop the pages. Should Emily Rivera be excluded from any family ceremonies of grief or remembrance, this document shall supersede the initial distribution of estate assets. I stared at it. My hands trembled. He had written this for me. Mr. Conway tapped another document beneath it, a notarized log of voicemail recordings. My stomach dropped as I scanned the transcript. A call had been made by my mother the day after Daniel's funeral. Voicemail Edwin, we won't be attending the service. It's not personal, but Chloe's wedding is next month. There's just too much going on. Not personal. They had left me to grieve alone. And Grandpa had recorded it all. You see, Miss Rivera, Mr. Conway said gently, your grandfather understood family and betrayal. He wanted to ensure the person who remembered his dignity and Daniel's humanity would receive the legacy he held most dear. I didn't speak for a full minute. When I finally did, it came out in a whisper. What legacy? Mr. Conway smiled faintly. His home, his estate, and the rights to his community fund, the one your parents now administer under his name. The alternate will gives it all to you. My breath caught. Everything they used to elevate Chloe's wedding to post online to parade as family success, it was Grandpa's. And it was now mine. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt responsible. And for the first time since Daniel's death, I had a direction, a map, a mission. Not revenge, redemption. I left the office with the documents in hand, the weight of them heavier than grief, but lighter than silence. It was time to write myself back into the story. Not by force, by truth. And Grandpa had given me the pen. I hadn't stepped into my grandfather's study since the week he passed. It was a modest room at the back of their old cottage, filled with dust silence and the faint scent of cedarwood and ink. For years, Grandpa Harold had written letters here to friends, old military buddies, editors, and me, always with that same black fountain pen and lined paper, always with precision, like every word mattered. And now I was back. I had called the property caretaker in advance. He left the key under the mat like old times, and when I stepped inside, nothing had changed. The couch still slouched in the same spot. His hat hung on the coat rack brim slightly tilted. The kettle on the stove, cold but clean. Time had frozen here. The study, however, was the only place I was drawn to. He had once told me on a quiet afternoon when the garden bloomed and the breeze smelled like lemon thyme, Emily, when people forget you remember who remembered you first. Back then I thought it was a pretty phrase. Now it felt like a map. I ran my fingers over the desk wood worn down from decades of use. In the top drawer I found envelopes, dozens, all labeled. Some were bills, some were drafts of old letters. But one stood out, a navy blue folder with my full name, middle name included written in Grandpa's hand. I opened it. Inside was a printed copy of his will, an official seal, and a personal letter. The letter began like all of his did, "My Emily, my quiet storm. I've seen the way they look at you now, the way they talk around you. I may not be alive when this unfolds, but I won't be silent. I left more than memories. I left instructions. I froze. The will stated clearly and legally that the family house, the very home where Mom and Dad still lived, where Chloe had her engagement party, where I once painted the fence as a kid, was conditionally mine. It said if my granddaughter Emily loses her spouse and the family does not attend the funeral, this property shall not be inherited by Susan or Gregory, nor by Chloe. It shall pass entirely to Emily, for she alone will have honored both life and loss. It was dated 5 years ago. I sat back in the worn leather chair and cried. Not out of triumph, not even out of sadness, but out of the sheer weight of being seen, finally, of someone believing my pain mattered. of someone predicting perhaps too accurately how fractured this family would become. I wiped my face and reread the clause again and again. He had even included a recorded voicemail, transcribed in the folder from the night he updated the will. In it, he spoke slowly. "To my lawyer, attach this to the file. My daughter has lost her compass, and my son-in-law too. I fear Emily will face storms without a shield. This is me giving her one in my way. I didn't know how to feel, but I knew what to do next." The next morning, I met with Grandpa's old attorney, a man named Charles Healy. He was already aware. Apparently, Grandpa had sent him a copy of everything years ago, along with instructions that if I ever came to him with the blue folder, it meant it was time. Time to act. Charles looked me in the eye and said, "This isn't revenge, Emily. This is justice planned by someone who knew your worth before you had to prove it." I took a breath and nodded. The storm had spoken. Now it was time to move. I wasn't sure what I expected when I knocked on the door of a modest office tucked between a bakery and a travel agency on the edge of downtown. The nameplate read, "Martin Feldman Estate Law." My grandfather had mentioned him once in passing many years ago, called him the last honest man in the business. I wasn't sure if that was an exaggeration, but it was the only lead I had. Mr. Feldman looked like the kind of man who kept spare fountain pens and wore cardigans in the summer. He blinked behind thick glasses and said, "Emily Walker, you're Richard's granddaughter." I nodded. Do you still have his will on file?" He hesitated, studying my face. "He told me you might come one day, said I should show you everything. I'll need a moment to retrieve it." The next 15 minutes passed in near silence. I sat on a faded leather chair while he shuffled papers behind a glass door. When he returned, he held a sealed envelope and an old flash drive in his hands. "This is a notarized copy of his final will," he said, placing the envelope in front of me. "And this," he tapped the flash drive, "is a recording." He insisted on making a video for clarity, and in his words, for drama if needed. I almost laughed. That was exactly the kind of thing Grandpa would say. But my hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal and unfolded the first page. And there it was. Not the contents of a simple inheritance, not a breakdown of trinkets and memories. This was a contingency will and if-then contract written with surgical precision. The house, the savings, the stocks, the heirlooms. All of it would go to me, but only if a specific condition was met. If my parents, Gregory and Susan Walker, failed to attend the funeral of Emily's husband, Daniel Rivera, all rights and assets shall transfer fully and solely to Emily Walker. I reread the line 4 times. There was a second clause. Should this condition be met, the transfer must be executed within 45 days of Daniel Rivera's passing. No appeals, no contest. The will includes a time-stamped audio file confirming the intent of the testator. I looked up, stunned. He knew. Mr. Feldman gave a quiet nod. He suspected. Your grandfather was meticulous, said the way your parents treated you. It was only a matter of time before their priorities turned to cruelty. I sat in silence, swallowing the tightness in my throat. The paper in my hand wasn't just a legal document, it was validation. It was a voice from the grave saying, "You mattered. I saw what they did. I won't let them win." I asked him to play the video. It flickered onto the screen grainy footage of Grandpa in his old study wearing a sweater I remembered from a Christmas 10 years ago. He leaned forward, looked straight into the camera and began. "Emily, if you're watching this, it means I was right. It means your parents let grief take a back seat to celebration. I want you to understand something. I never saw you as second. You were the only one who stayed with me during my chemo. The one who sat through silent dinners and drove me to appointments without complaint. This house, these assets, they were never about money. They're about value. And you, my dear, are valuable." His voice cracked toward the end. I felt mine do the same. Mr. Feldman handed me a folder. "You don't need to decide anything right now, but you do need to know this is binding. If you choose to proceed, I'll begin the transfer protocol." I looked down at the will again. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the house. It was about rewriting a story I didn't realize had already been written in my favor. "I'll proceed," I said softly. And just like that, the first stone in a quiet reckoning was set. I didn't leave Mr. Feldman's office with fire in my chest. I left with something colder, clearer. It wasn't rage or revenge that followed me down the block. It was focus. For years I had let things slide. I'd let their silence bury me. I'd let their absence at Daniel's funeral tear open wounds I couldn't name. But now I had something they couldn't erase: a document. A voice. A will written not just with ink, but with intention. I spent the weekend in my apartment pulling out every box, folder, and drawer I hadn't touched since Daniel died. I wasn't looking for photos. I was looking for evidence. Letters Grandpa had sent me. Emails confirming dates. The funeral announcement. A printed program from the service with the date and time stamped clearly. Every piece mattered. Because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to show up at their door with fury. I was going to let the law speak. I was going to do exactly what they had done to me, deliver the blow in silence. On Monday morning, I met Mr. Feldman again. He reviewed the evidence I brought in. "You've covered everything," he said. "The condition is airtight. The timeline is precise. You're within your rights." I nodded. "Then let's begin." He drafted a formal notice of execution, a legal document informing Gregory and Susan Walker that the will of Richard Walker was now being enforced. The transfer of all property and assets listed in the contingency clause would begin within 10 business days. I asked him to mail it, not email, not courier, just mail. The same way they'd sent out wedding invites, the same way they sent me birthday cards with blank signatures. I didn't want them to see it coming. Meanwhile, I researched real estate transfers. I called a few discreet contractors about inspections. I learned how to change utility bills. I contacted a nonprofit that helped young widows find transitional housing just to ask a few questions. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with the house. I just knew I wouldn't be moving in with bitterness. If I stepped across that threshold, it wouldn't be as someone clinging to a victory, it would be as someone claiming her place in a story that should have always included her. A week later, I received confirmation that the notice had been delivered. I imagined them standing by their mailbox holding the envelope with our grandfather's name on it. I wondered if their hands trembled like mine had. I didn't hear from them. Not a call, not a message, not a denial. But silence speaks. 2 days after that, Mr. Feldman emailed to say the preliminary property transfer had been accepted without contest. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because part of me had been waiting for them to fight, to plead, to protest. Instead, they folded. Maybe guilt is heavier than anger. Maybe losing something you thought you owned hurts more when you realize it was never yours to begin with. On the 10th business day, the transfer became official. I was now legally the owner of the house. I hadn't stepped inside since I was 24, but I didn't celebrate. That night, I stood at my kitchen sink, staring out into the city lights. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat in silence. It wasn't joy I felt. It was release. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa." Not because of the house, because he had believed me before I even knew I'd need him to. The morning they came back from the honeymoon, I was already at work pretending to focus on quarterly spreadsheets. But my mind wasn't in the numbers. It was on the mailbox at 112 Waverly Lane. I imagined the mail slot creaking open, the envelope slipping through, resting quietly on the hardwood floor. My grandfather once polished by hand. I had no way of knowing exactly when Chloe and her new husband would return, but I'd traced their itinerary through the social media posts of their friends. A sunset beach dinner in Bali, a jungle resort in Ubud, a just-married selfie with a champagne bottle, and the caption "Family, where life begins and love never ends." I didn't comment. I didn't like the post, but I saw it. That morning they landed. I know because Chloe's best friend tagged her at JFK holding a bouquet of flowers and a welcome back sign. By noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring out. At 2:14 p.m., Mr. Feldman sent me a brief update. Walker residence was accessed this morning. I expect questions to follow. Please remain silent for now. I will handle communication. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Later that evening, my neighbor, the one still living down the street from my childhood home, sent me a message I hadn't seen in years. Emily, I don't want to stir things, but your parents are outside your grandpa's house. Your mom was crying on the porch. Your dad looked stunned. Is everything okay? I stared at the message. Then I shut off my phone. That night, I allowed myself one glass of wine. Just one. I didn't toast. I didn't celebrate. I just sat there in my tiny one-bedroom apartment that still carried the scent of Daniel's favorite candle and watched the city outside. Somewhere my parents were sitting in a house that was no longer theirs, and Chloe, she was walking into a living room she thought she'd inherit one day. By the next morning, I received a formal email from Mr. Feldman. The family had responded. They had requested clarification. He had replied by attaching a digital copy of the will and the recording of the voicemail my grandfather had left. Everything was out in the open now. The estate was transferred. The house belonged to me. The will's contingency clause had been activated. My parents had violated it by not attending Daniel's funeral. The clause had included specifics. If they chose not to attend out of convenience appearance or personal preference, they would forfeit all rights to Richard Walker's estate. And they had. What made the situation irreversible was the timestamp on the funeral's official registry and the calendar entry in their email, showing they had booked a wedding spa appointment during the same hour. Mr. Feldman had found everything. Chloe sent an email later that day. It wasn't to me, it was to Mr. Feldman. This must be a misunderstanding. My parents weren't aware of the clause. We were under the impression the house would be mine. He forwarded it to me. I read it once, then again, and I felt nothing. Because for the first time, they were reacting to something I hadn't said. Something they couldn't blame on my sensitivity or poor timing. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a legal fact. They were stunned not because I had acted, but because I had followed the instructions of someone who was gone, someone they underestimated, someone who, even in death, had more faith in me than they ever did. That night, I lit a candle by Daniel's photo. Not out of ritual, just gratitude. I kept it quiet, I whispered. Just like you would have. And for the first time in months, I slept without waking up at 3 a.m., wondering if I had done something wrong. The file Mr. Feldman sent them wasn't just a scanned will or a typed PDF. It was a video file. A small 3-minute message recorded by my grandfather just 2 months before he passed. It had been saved with a timestamp embedded into his legal documents, stored securely with instructions, only to be played upon violation of Clause 7B. Clause 7B, the one no one expected to be real, the one they never thought would come into effect. Mr. Feldman scheduled the official meeting for the following day. My parents, still rattled and confused, showed up in their usual fashion, my father in his outdated gray blazer, my mother in her pearl earrings. She reserved for serious matters. Chloe came too tight-lipped, her husband a step behind, unsure whether to speak or just observe. I didn't attend. That was never the plan. I'd already made my statement by not making one. But I asked Mr. Feldman to record the session. I didn't want to miss it. I just didn't need to be in the room. The camera was positioned across the desk, capturing each of their faces clearly as the video began to play. My grandfather appeared on the screen, sitting in the exact leather chair Mr. Feldman now occupied. He was wearing his worn cardigan, the one with a frayed sleeve, and his voice was calm but clear. Gregory, Susan, if you're watching this, it means you didn't go to Daniel's funeral. And if that's true, then I was right. I want to believe it was a mistake, that you forgot, or that maybe you were sick. But if it was because of how you felt about his background or his career or his family, then you've disappointed me beyond words. Emily was always the quiet one. She didn't ask for much. She gave more than she should have. And still I watched as you gave less in return. You called her dramatic when she cried, ungrateful when she asked for fairness, cold when she finally stopped coming around. My mother's face began to tremble. I warned you, he continued. I told you one day your actions would matter, that how you treat your children has consequences. So here it is. If you didn't show up for Daniel, then this house, the one I built brick by brick, doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to Emily. There was a pause. My grandfather leaned forward in the video as if he were staring directly at them. Don't you dare say she manipulated me. Don't say she plotted. I wrote this before she even knew. Because I knew you. I knew what you were capable of. And what you weren't. And if you think you've lost something good, maybe now you'll understand what it feels like. The video ended with a flicker of light. Just a blink. And then silence. The room on camera remained frozen for a moment. My mother covered her mouth. My father blinked hard, adjusting his glasses, as if the blur was a trick of the screen and not of his own doing. Chloe looked from one parent to the other, stunned. No one said a word. Mr. Feldman cleared his throat. As per the legal terms, the transfer is complete. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Assistance can be arranged if needed. There were no protests, no screaming, just stunned acceptance. Later that night, I watched the video alone in my apartment. I replayed my grandfather's voice 3 times. Not to enjoy it, but to understand that he had seen me. He had prepared for this moment not to protect me from pain, but to give me a weapon of peace. I didn't need revenge. I just needed someone to remember the truth. And now the truth had a voice. His voice. I didn't feel triumphant. That's what surprised me the most. When Mr. Feldman sent me the video of the meeting, I watched it from the same couch where I had spent many nights alone grieving Daniel. A cup of cold tea rested beside me untouched. The lights in my apartment were dim, casting long shadows that stretched across the hardwood floor. The only sound was my grandfather's voice, playing again in my head, echoing through every corner of the room. There were no loud confrontations, no breakdowns or accusations, just the slow, quiet sinking of everything they had built on favoritism and silence. I walked out to my small balcony. From there, the world looked ordinary cars, passing a woman walking her dog, a boy on a skateboard. Life didn't pause just because mine had shifted, and yet inside me, something had undeniably changed. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not pitied, not tolerated, seen. My phone lit up with a notification, an email from Chloe. The subject line, "We didn't know." I didn't open it, not yet, maybe not ever. I knew what it would say. I knew the half-hearted regrets it might carry, the subtle justifications, the line about how things looked from our side. None of it mattered. I wasn't looking for their words anymore. I wasn't chasing closure through their guilt. That night I drove past the house. The porch light was still on, but the curtains were drawn. A for sale sign hadn't gone up yet, but it would soon. I could almost see the boxes inside taped shut in haste. I wondered if they'd pack slowly, hoping for some miracle to undo it all. I didn't stop the car. I didn't roll down the window. I just drove by. The next morning, Mr. Feldman called. "They're not contesting it," he said. "They signed the acknowledgement forms, quietly." "And Chloe?" I asked. She left with her husband, didn't say much. Her face said enough. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," he replied. "Your grandfather made it very clear what he wanted. You just gave it the dignity it deserved." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table staring at a photo of Daniel. It was the one from our first anniversary. He was wearing a ridiculous red bow tie and holding a slice of cake like it was a trophy. He would have laughed at all this. He would have reminded me not to let anger rot the best parts of myself. And I hadn't. I had stood up not by shouting, but by standing still with truth and with grace. There were people who messaged me in the days that followed. Old classmates, distant cousins, even a few family friends. They had seen the wedding photos online, noticed my absence, and now they reached out in whispers. "Emily, I had no idea. Why didn't anyone say anything? I always thought something felt off." I responded to none of them, not out of malice. I just didn't owe explanations anymore. I went back to work. I replanted the small balcony garden Daniel had once joked looked like a jungle in training. I bought new books. I cooked for myself. Slowly, life became mine again, not as a reaction to theirs, but as a quiet statement of its own. The house would be mine legally within weeks, but in truth it had always been mine in spirit, in the memories with my grandfather, in the time I spent scraping old paint off the porch with him, in the stories he told me as we sat on the steps eating popsicles in summer. I wasn't going back to live there. I had something else in mind, but that part of the story would come later. For now, I let silence do what it does best, speak the truth that words had failed to. And in that silence, I finally heard myself again. The first time I returned to the house, not to drive by, not to glance from afar, but to truly step inside it, felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had grown in ways that made narrow hallways feel like tight corners of a life I'd outgrown. The air was musty, the kind of stale that settles in when silence becomes a permanent resident. Dust clung to forgotten picture frames. A half-burned candle sat on the windowsill, its wick blackened, untouched. I walked from room to room without turning on the lights, letting the muted gray of the overcast sky spill through the windows. The kitchen still had the wooden table my grandfather built with his own hands. I ran my fingers along its edge. There were small notches in the wood where I had once carved letters, my initials and Daniel's, when I was 12, and didn't know what love truly meant yet. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But there was a quiet strength inside me now. A voice that whispered, "You don't have to live in your pain to remember it." Over the next few days, I returned not as a daughter reclaiming something stolen, but as a woman with a mission. I contacted a local nonprofit that helped young widows and single mothers find transitional housing. I told them I had a space, one they could use indefinitely, free of charge. I offered to cover utilities. I didn't want rent. I didn't want praise. All I asked was that the women who came here were given peace. Miss Carter, the director of the shelter, blinked when I told her. "You want to remain anonymous?" "Yes." She paused. May I ask why I smiled faintly? Because I was once invisible in this house, and I know the power of quiet spaces. We spent the next few weeks transforming the home. New beds were brought in. The wallpaper in the guest room, faded roses that had long lost their bloom, was replaced with soft, earthy tones. The bathroom fixtures were updated. The yard, once overgrown with weeds, was cleared and planted with lavender and rosemary. Calming things, healing things. I donated Daniel's books. I left the shelves open. I placed a note inside the front cover of the one he loved most. This book made me feel less alone. I hope it does the same for you. I found old letters my grandfather had written tucked into a shoebox beneath his bed. Some were addressed to me. I didn't read them all at once. I let them come to me slowly, like warm rain in spring. One night, while repainting the front porch, a neighbor came by. An older woman with a small dog and tired eyes. "You're the granddaughter, aren't you?" she asked. I nodded. "We always wondered what happened to you." I shrugged gently. I was here, just not seen. She hesitated. Then she said, "It's good what you're doing, real good." That meant more than she knew. When the shelter officially opened, we didn't have a ribbon-cutting ceremony. No speeches, no press. Just a soft morning with sunlight filtering through the trees and the creak of the front gate. As the first guest arrived, clutching a toddler in one arm and a paper bag of belongings in the other, I opened the door myself. "Welcome," I said simply. "This place is yours now." She looked around wide-eyed. "It's beautiful." "So are you," I replied. "You just forgot for a little while." And as she stepped inside, I knew the house had found a new purpose. Not as a battleground, not as a monument to loss, but as a beginning, not for me. I had already begun again, but for women like her who needed the very thing I once searched for, a place to land. A place to heal. A place to be held by nothing but dignity. And that was enough. It didn't take long before word spread quietly the way important things often do. There were no news articles, no features on local TV, just murmurs between people who needed something they couldn't name. Women came in with hollow eyes and heavy bags under them, children clinging to their sides. Some had been sleeping in cars. Others had fled in the middle of the night. They were young mostly, but the grief they carried made them seem ancient. And somehow they all found this place. No one ever asked who owned the house. They just knew it was safe. Ms. Carter handled the formalities, and I stayed in the background, refilling kitchen supplies, dropping off books, planting flowers around the walkway. I never introduced myself as the one behind it. That wasn't the point. The point was the space. A small chalkboard stood in the kitchen. On it, every woman who passed through left something behind a quote, a wish, a name they wanted to remember. One morning I came by and saw this scribbled in green chalk. Today my son smiled again, for the first time in 3 months. Maria. I stood there longer than I probably should have, hand resting on the corner of the board. Daniel would have loved this. He'd always believed people just needed a chance, a soft place to land. That's why he volunteered so much. Why he'd drive an extra 20 minutes just to help a neighbor change a flat tire. Why he never let someone cry alone if he could help it. And now, without even knowing, he was still helping them. Through me. One day I walked past a room and saw a little girl coloring in the corner. She had drawn a house with wings. When I asked her what it was, she grinned and said, "This is the magic house. When you go inside, your heart stops hurting." I didn't have words for that, so I just smiled and nodded. Around the neighborhood, people began to notice the change. What had once been a solemn structure with shutters always drawn now had light spilling from the windows at night. Wind chimes on the porch, children's laughter behind the hedges. Neighbors left food baskets on the steps. Some donated clothes. A retired carpenter even offered to fix the back fence for free. No one should feel unsafe not here, he said. Chloe knew eventually. Of course she did. I never told her. But one day I saw her car parked across the street. She didn't get out, just sat there for a while staring. Her husband wasn't with her. I don't know what she was thinking, if she felt shame, regret, or simply confusion. She never called, never wrote. And that was okay. Forgiveness doesn't always need a conversation. Sometimes it's just choosing not to carry the bitterness anymore. Mom and Dad moved into a modest apartment near the freeway. I didn't hear from them either, but someone once told me they saw my father sitting alone on a park bench holding a photo. Whether it was of Chloe or me, I don't know. It doesn't matter. This house, my grandfather's house, was no longer a monument to what I had lost. It had become a sanctuary. A ripple in the quiet water of a town that hadn't known where to place its wounded. I kept coming back. I tended the garden. I joined Miss Carter for evening tea sometimes. She always made 2 cups, even if she wasn't sure I'd show. I still don't know why you picked this path, she said once. I took a breath. Because I was given a house when I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. She nodded slowly. And now I don't need it to belong to me. I just need it to belong to someone. She clinked her teacup gently against mine. To soft places, to beginnings, I replied. I returned to the house on a late autumn night, the kind where the wind whispered through the trees like it was carrying stories too old to tell aloud. I hadn't been there in weeks. Life had taken me elsewhere, speaking engagements, a small job with a non-profit, a quiet rhythm of healing I didn't dare interrupt. But something in me said it was time. The porch light was on. Ms. Carter had left a note tucked into the screen door. One woman brought her newborn here last night. She said she didn't know where else to go. Below that, in smaller print, "The nursery still smells like lavender." I smiled. Walking through the hallway, I noticed the walls now carried the scent of coffee and fabric softener of living. Of beginnings, the chalkboard was almost full. I stopped for a moment and read each line. Some were joyful, others solemn. But all of them were real. I didn't plan to stay long, just a walkthrough, one last look. I passed the kitchen and glanced at the window that once overlooked my grandfather's tomato garden. It had long since turned into a herb patch for the women who cooked dinner together in the evenings. That was the kind of magic that happened here now. Shared meals, shared grief, shared recovery. Upstairs, the room I once used as a child had become a shared dormitory. 6 cots, 6 women. They had left behind folded laundry, a book open on a pillow, and a stuffed bunny tucked under a blanket. Lives in progress. I stepped outside into the backyard, my boots crunching against the orange leaves. It was here that Grandpa once built a swing. I remember him pushing Chloe and me, her laughter always louder, always more insistent. I didn't resent her for it anymore. I had outgrown that. And still the silence between us had never been filled. I pulled a small envelope from my coat pocket. It was handwritten, so the paper slightly creased from being folded too long. I walked into the old tool shed, now repurposed as storage for donations, and found the wooden drawer Grandpa once called his keeper of secrets. I slipped the envelope inside. No name on it, no address, just words. If you ever feel like you don't belong anywhere, try becoming a place where others do. You'd be surprised how many lives you can hold just by opening your door. I left it there. I don't know who will read it or when, but someone will. On my way out, I took one last look at the house. The paint was fading in some spots. The roof probably needed fixing before the first snow, but it stood steady, just like Grandpa. I touched the brick wall beside the front step. A small gesture, one of gratitude, not ownership. This wasn't my house anymore. It was theirs, all of theirs. Women who needed a soft place, children who needed a safe start, volunteers who needed to feel useful again. And for me, it had been a bridge. A place to cross over the ache and find something steadier on the other side. As I walked away, the porch light blinked once. I don't believe in signs, but I believe in peace. And for the first time in years, I carried it with me, not just behind me. That night I slept without waking once. And when morning came, I made tea, opened the window, and let the air in. Life didn't need to be loud to be full. If you've ever been told you don't belong, by your own family, by your partner, by a place you once called home, please hear me when I say you are not alone. People like us, we don't always scream. We don't always slam doors. Sometimes we just walk away, quietly, with dignity, and 1,000 unspoken words inside our chest. And sometimes we carry that silence for years, thinking we're the only ones doing so. We're not. I used to believe that family meant roots, that no matter where you drifted, your blood would anchor you, that parents, even flawed ones, would choose fairness when it mattered most. But when mine didn't, I learned that being left out doesn't make you less worthy. It just makes you the one with the clearer view from the outside looking in. And from that vantage point, I saw something. I saw how pain doesn't have to rot. It can grow. It can reshape itself into purpose. So instead of clinging to the idea of a home that no longer welcomed me, I built one that welcomed others. I stopped begging to be understood and started becoming the kind of place that didn't ask questions, just offered a chair, a warm plate, a soft bed, a moment of safety. To every woman watching this, who's ever been told you're too much or not enough, you are neither. You are exactly the kind of person who turns silence into sanctuary. To every son who felt like a stranger at his own dinner table, you don't have to prove you're lovable to people who've decided not to see it. Love is not earned by suffering. It's revealed by how we treat others once we've known pain ourselves. To the broken-hearted, your grief is not a weakness. It's a compass. Let it guide you past the bitterness, past the shame, and toward the kind of life that doesn't wait for permission to be beautiful. I'm not telling you to fight them. I'm not telling you to burn bridges. I'm asking you to build new ones, across cities, across souls, across years of silence. Don't waste your strength yelling at closed doors. Invest it in opening windows, in carving spaces where people like you, quiet warriors, gentle rebels, late bloomers can breathe. Because here's what I know now. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through an old tape recording. Sometimes it comes in the form of a key mailed to you years too late. Sometimes it's just a woman standing in front of a house she once lost, choosing to turn it into something better than revenge. Hope, healing, home. If you feel like you've been cast aside, start something no one can take from you. Not even your own blood. Make that business. Start that shelter. Write that book. Bake the cake your mother never let you eat on your birthday. Sing the lullaby your father never sang. Live the life they thought you couldn't without them, and then some. And when you're strong enough, turn around. Not to invite them back, but to show others the path you carved alone. Because your story, it matters. Your voice matters, even if it shakes, even if it's been silent too long. Speak, create, forgive, but don't forget. And above all, remember this. They may have tried to erase you from the family photo, but they will never be able to erase the way you rebuilt yourself from the torn corners. You belong, right here, right now, exactly as you are. And the world is waiting for what only you can bring. So bring it. They never said sorry, not with words, not with looks, not with time. But I didn't need their apology. Because the moment I stepped into the house they once banned me from, and turned it into shelter, into sanctuary, I rewrote the ending they tried to give me. I learned that justice doesn't always come from courts. Sometimes it comes from legacy, from recorded voices, from the echo of a man, my grandfather, who saw me even when others didn't. They had each other, but I had something better. The truth, and the will to live by it. If you've ever been left out, left behind, or left alone, know this. Your story doesn't end there. It begins where they stopped looking, and it ends wherever you choose to rise. Thank you for listening to mine. And if it helped you find your voice even just a little, then maybe all of it was worth it.